The first time I ever tried to use Airbnb, I realized very quickly that the whole thing wasn't for me. I had always been a hotel person, someone who liked the idea of walking into a lobby, checking in with a professional at the desk, and knowing that the room I was getting had been turned over 1,000 times before. Hotels came with structure. They came with predictability. Even if you got a small, dingy room, there was still a comfort in knowing there were other people around, staff on hand, security cameras in the hallways, locks that had been replaced over and over again. You didn't have to think twice about it. But that weekend in Baltimore, things didn't go the way I planned. I was heading there during baseball season. The Red Sox were in town, and if you've ever been to Baltimore when Boston comes through, you know how it goes. They called it Fenway South for a reason. The city was crawling with Boston fans, and they filled up the hotels fast. I didn't think much of it when I first started searching, figuring I could just book something close to the inner harbor like I usually would. But every listing I clicked was sold out. The nicer places were gone, the mid-range chains were gone, even the budget hotels were all showing no vacancy. After hours of searching, I started looking further and further out. Nothing. That's when Airbnb crossed my mind. I had never used it before, but I'd heard about it. Friends said it was cheaper, sometimes even nicer, and you could end up staying in a real neighborhood instead of a tourist bubble. I figured it was worth a shot. I pulled up the app and searched around downtown Baltimore. There were a few listings. Most were already booked, but one popped up that seemed reasonable. It was a room in someone's house, not too far from the stadium. The price was decent, cheaper than any hotel I'd seen, and the photos looked fine. Nothing fancy, just a normal-looking row house with a bedroom and shared bathroom. I sent an inquiry. Within an hour, the host responded. She said she wouldn't actually be home that weekend, but she could leave the key under the mat for me. I read the message twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. She was just going to leave her house wide open for me. A complete stranger, someone with zero Airbnb history, no reviews, no track record. I hadn't even completed a stay yet, and she was telling me I could just let myself in. I remember staring at that message and feeling unsettled. It wasn't excitement about having a whole place to myself. It was dread. Who did that? Who trusted someone so blindly that they would hand over access to their personal home? And even more, why did she feel comfortable telling me, a stranger, exactly where the key would be? If she was willing to tell me that, who else had she told before? Who else knew about that key under the mat? I kept imagining myself arriving there late at night, walking up the steps of a row house in an unfamiliar neighborhood, lifting the mat and finding the key. I'd let myself in, close the door behind me, and stand in a silent house that wasn't mine, not knowing who else might already be inside. The idea made my stomach tighten. I tried to shake it off and look at it logically. Maybe she'd done this dozens of times before. Maybe it had always worked out fine. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But the thought kept coming back. Once I closed that door behind me, I would be completely alone in a stranger's house. No hotel staff, no front desk, no cameras, no other guests around. Just me in an unfamiliar city with no way of knowing if the locks were really secure, no way of knowing if anyone else had a copy of the key. I sat with it for a while, trying to talk myself into it, but the unease only grew stronger. I realized that the whole setup was exactly the opposite of what made me feel safe. Hotels felt safe because of structure, because of the barrier between you and the unknown. Airbnb was the unknown, and I wasn't built for it. I messaged her back and told her I'd pass. Then I went back to the hotel searches. I finally found a cheap room way out at the edge of the city, just about as far as Baltimore's public transit system would take me. It was nothing special, just a basic budget hotel near the end of a light rail line. The walls were thin, the bed was stiff, and the bathroom had seen better days. But I felt safer there than I ever would have in that empty row house. Every day, I rode the train 40 minutes into the city. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. I went to the game, walked around the inner harbor, grabbed some food, and when the day was done, I got on the train and rode it back to my plain little hotel room. Each night when I swiped my keycard, I felt a small wave of relief. I was tired, but I was safe. Looking back, I don't think I overreacted. If anything, I think I trusted my instincts. That first Airbnb experience, or rather, the one I never went through with, showed me that not every new idea is right for everyone. Some people love Airbnb. Some people treat it like a business, renting out spare units with nothing personal in them. For them, it's no different than running a hotel. But when it comes to people letting strangers into their actual homes, their real living spaces, I can't wrap my head around it. To me, a home is personal. It's private. It's where you keep the little things that make up your life, the things you don't want anyone else handling. Inviting someone into that without ever meeting them, without knowing anything about them, feels like asking for trouble. Maybe not every time, maybe not for everyone, but enough to make me think twice. That weekend in Baltimore ended up fine for me. I got to see the Red Sox play, I managed the train ride, and I saved myself from spending 3 nights alone in a house that I would have never felt comfortable in. But it also set the tone for how I've seen Airbnb ever since. Whenever people tell me about their positive experiences, I nod and listen, but in the back of my mind, I always picture that row house with the key under the mat. I picture myself stepping inside, setting down my bag, and feeling that heavy silence close in. And then I think of the thin walls and stiff bed of that budget hotel at the end of the train line, and I know I made the right choice. Because for me, the scariest part of Airbnb isn't bad guests or messy rooms. It's the idea of stepping into a stranger's private space, closing the door, and trying to sleep while the thought lingers that you don't belong there, and that you never really know who else might have a way in. I learned the hard way that Airbnb is not the same thing as running a hotel, no matter how much you try to treat it that way. I had gone into it with what felt like a realistic mindset. I read all the warnings online, I checked forums, and I knew plenty of people said that hosting was safer when you don't actually live in the unit you're renting out. They explained that if it's just a separate apartment, sparsely decorated, stocked with basic furniture, dishes, towels, and a washer-dryer, then the worst-case scenario is replacing a few things. The risk, they said, was minimal because it wasn't your personal home. For people like me who did live in the unit, the advice was to stick with verified renters, people who had solid reviews from previous stays, especially in professional-looking units. That all sounded logical to me at the time. I tried to convince myself I was just being cautious, maybe even paranoid, by worrying too much about strangers living in my home. Still, I couldn't shake that thought in the back of my head. All it would take is one bad booking to ruin everything. When I first listed my space, I did it reluctantly. My apartment wasn't a business property. It wasn't some empty condo bought to flip as a rental. It was my home. My clothes were in the closet. My books stacked on the shelves. My photos framed on the dresser. I had spent years slowly turning the place into something comfortable and personal. Letting a stranger step into that felt risky, but I also needed the money at the time. I figured if I screened carefully, I could keep the risk low. The first few guests were fine. Quiet, clean, and polite. They left decent reviews, and I left decent reviews for them. My anxiety settled down, and I started thinking maybe I had overreacted. Maybe this was going to be easier than I thought. Then came the guest that reminded me exactly why I had been so hesitant. On paper, this person seemed like a dream renter. Verified ID, glowing reviews from past stays, and a polite message exchange before booking. The reviews had all been for what looked like professional Airbnb units, plain apartments with minimal furniture and no personal touches. I figured that was a good sign. If other hosts had vouched for them, why would I expect trouble? I prepared the apartment like usual. Clean sheets, fresh towels, kitchen wiped down, fridge cleared. I tried to tuck away a few personal things. Nothing major, just stuff I didn't want anyone else handling. I didn't lock up everything though. I didn't have a separate owner's closet like some hosts, and I wasn't about to rent a storage unit. So my electronics stayed where they were. My books stayed on the shelves, my shoes and clothes in the closet. I told myself they'd be safe. The first night seemed fine. I didn't get any messages or complaints, but the second night I got a notification from my security camera in the hallway. I didn't have cameras inside the apartment, of course, but the hallway outside was covered by the building system. I could see the guest bringing in 2 large bags late at night, bags that hadn't been there before. I tried not to overthink it. Maybe they were just carrying in supplies for a longer stay. Still, I had this gnawing feeling something wasn't right. The next few days were quiet, and then the booking ended. I went back into the apartment, expecting maybe a little mess, maybe some laundry left behind. Instead, what I walked into was the sickening realization that my fear of Airbnb had been right all along. The place was stripped. Not trashed, stripped. My laptop was gone. My camera gone. Every piece of jewelry gone. Even random items that I didn't think anyone would want were gone. Kitchen knives, small appliances, even my vacuum cleaner. My closet was half empty. Shoes, jackets, and even a few shirts were missing. My drawers had been rifled through. They took things that weren't worth much money but mattered to me, like old family photos, small keepsakes, and books with handwritten notes inside. It wasn't like a break-in. The locks weren't forced. The only person who had been in that apartment was the guest I had let in. They had stayed just long enough to make sure they could move everything out without drawing attention, and then they disappeared. I sat in the middle of the empty living room, staring at the bare shelves where my things used to be, and all I could think about was how stupid I had been to let a stranger into my home. The police came, but they didn't offer much hope. The guest had used a verified profile, but as it turned out, that didn't mean anything. Fake IDs can still get verified. Reviews can be manipulated. The account itself was likely stolen or fabricated. The bags I had seen on the security camera were probably empty suitcases they filled up with my things. I contacted Airbnb, thinking surely this was the kind of situation their host guarantee was designed for. But the process was slow, confusing, and frustrating. They wanted endless photos, receipts for every single item stolen, detailed descriptions of each thing. Some of the things I couldn't even prove I had owned, like the keepsakes and gifts. And the expensive items, like my laptop and camera, required receipts I no longer had because I had bought them years earlier. Weeks went by. I submitted everything I could, but each time Airbnb came back with more questions, more requirements. It felt less like they were trying to help me and more like they were hoping I'd give up. 2 months later, I was still fighting with them. I was living in an apartment that didn't feel like mine anymore, stripped of everything that had once made it home. Replacing even the basics was expensive, and some things couldn't be replaced at all. Every time I walked into the living room or opened a drawer, I felt that same punch of violation. I had thought Airbnb was a way to make a little extra money, maybe to ease some financial stress. Instead, it had cost me far more than I had ever made. It wasn't just about the money either, it was the trust, the sense of safety, the feeling that my home was truly mine. All of that was gone. In the end, I realized that hosting strangers isn't just a side hustle or a business. Not when it's your actual home. It's an open door to anyone who wants to step in, and you don't get to choose what they do once they're inside. Some people will treat it with respect, but all it takes is one who doesn't, and the damage lingers long after they're gone. I never hosted again after that. Couldn't. The risk wasn't worth it, not for any amount of money. My home was supposed to be the one place I felt safe, and letting strangers in had taken that away. No payout from Airbnb was ever going to fix that. That's when it hit me, what had happened to me wasn't some freak accident. It was the exact thing I had been afraid of from the start. And now, every time I think about Airbnb, I don't think of easy money or flexible side income. I think of an empty apartment, shelves stripped bare, and the feeling of standing in the ruins of my own life, wondering why I ever thought it was a good idea to hand my keys to a stranger. I've always trusted my instincts when it comes to where I stay. I've done my share of traveling for work, for family visits, and for the occasional short vacation, and one thing I've learned about myself is that I like consistency. I like knowing that when I check into a hotel, there's a front desk with staff, a system in place, cameras in the lobby, and people whose job it is to make sure I'm safe. It doesn't matter if the hotel is bare bones or fancy. What matters is that it feels like a controlled environment. For years, people tried to convince me to try Airbnb. They talk about how much cheaper it was, how unique the places could be, how you could stay in a real neighborhood instead of a tourist zone. A few even bragged about renting entire houses for less than what a hotel room would cost. I listened, but in the back of my mind, I never felt comfortable with the idea. The thought of stepping into a stranger's house, sleeping in their bed, showering in their bathroom, and trusting that they weren't hiding cameras or leaving the door wide open for anyone else. That made my skin crawl. Still, I wondered if maybe I was being too paranoid. Maybe I was just stuck in my ways. After all, plenty of people I knew swore by it. They seemed to have good experiences, and not everyone could be wrong, right? But then I started reading stories. Not the polished, cheerful ones you see in promotional ads, but the raw ones people share online. The stories that never make it to the marketing brochures. Hosts who came home to trashed apartments. Renters who found hidden cameras in alarm clocks. People whose valuables were stolen. Or who ended up in neighborhoods they didn't feel safe walking through after dark. Some stories weren't even dramatic, just unsettling. Hosts leaving keys under doormats, strangers coming and going without oversight, disputes over damages that never got resolved. At first, I told myself those were just exceptions, outliers, things that could happen but probably wouldn't. But the more I read, the more it hit me that Airbnb had no real safety net. When you stayed in a hotel, there were checks and balances, staff to hold accountable, corporate policies, legal standards. With Airbnb, it was just two people hoping for the best. A guest hoping the host wasn't shady, and a host hoping the guest wasn't destructive. If something went wrong, it wasn't clear who would actually step in to help. One story in particular sealed it for me. A host explained how their guest had used a fake profile to rent their place. They came back from vacation to find their home completely stripped. Electronics gone, jewelry gone, even sentimental items gone. Airbnb's process for helping them recover damages dragged on for months, and they never got close to what they lost. I remember reading that and feeling this pit in my stomach. That was the exact scenario I had pictured in my head whenever I thought about trying it, and here was proof that it wasn't just paranoia. It was real. The scary part wasn't just the theft. It was the sense of violation. I tried to imagine coming home to my own place and finding everything gone, knowing that I had invited it by trusting a stranger. That was the part that stuck with me. After that, I started noticing how casual some people were about the whole thing. I'd see listings where the host would say something like, "I won't be home, but the key is under the mat." That was supposed to be reassuring, but to me it sounded insane. Leaving a house wide open like that, with no idea who the person really was, seemed like asking for disaster. Even worse, some of those people admitted they lived there full-time, meaning they were letting strangers walk into the most personal parts of their lives. I couldn't imagine coming back to sleep in a bed that dozens of strangers had just used, or to sit on a couch where people I'd never met had lounged, spilling food, maybe going through drawers, maybe worse. I think what unnerves me most about the whole concept is the lack of separation. With a hotel, it's business. It's designed for strangers. The room isn't anyone's personal space. It's just a room. But with Airbnb, unless it's one of those units set up specifically for renting, you're walking into someone's private life. You're touching their furniture, their dishes, their books, their memories, and they're trusting you not to wreck it. That trust works both ways too. As a guest, you're trusting them not to spy on you, not to double book, not to walk in while you're gone. You're trusting their neighbors not to notice your presence and assume the worst. You're trusting that the locks are solid and that nobody else has a spare key floating around. That's a lot of trust to hand over to a total stranger just because a website says it's fine. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't worth it to me. Even if nothing bad ever happened, the level of unease I'd feel would ruin the trip. I'd never sleep soundly in a stranger's bed. I'd never shake the thought that someone could have access to the place at any moment. I'd be checking corners, double-locking doors, wondering if the person upstairs was really just a neighbor or another guest I didn't know about. So I made my decision. No matter how expensive or inconvenient hotels might be, I was sticking with them. I'd rather stay in a budget motel at the edge of town than spend one night in an Airbnb that made my skin crawl. At least with a motel, you know what you're getting. At least you're not walking blind into someone else's private world, hoping they're trustworthy. People laugh sometimes when I say I won't use Airbnb, like I'm overreacting. But the truth is, I've never regretted that decision. Every time I check into a hotel, I feel a small wave of relief. I hand over my ID, get my room key, and know there's a system in place if anything goes wrong. That peace of mind is worth far more than the few dollars I might save. If anything, Hearing all those stories didn't just confirm my fears. It made me confident that I had made the right choice all along. The scariest part about Airbnb isn't what might happen. It's knowing that if something does, you're on your own. And for me, that's enough to stay away for good. I've always been told that Airbnb is an easy way to make some side money. People brag about renting out their place while they're gone and coming back to a handful of cash without doing much work. On the surface, it sounds good. Clean up, take some pictures, list your home, and then let strangers live in it while you're somewhere else. But every time I think about it, I can't shake the unease that creeps in. I've lived in the same house for years. It isn't massive or fancy, but it's mine. Every piece of furniture has a story. The couch in the living room is worn in from the same spot where I sit every night. The table has scratches from when I dropped a toolbox on it. My shelves are full of books I've collected since I was a teenager. My closet has old jackets I never wear but can't get rid of. Everything inside my house represents time, effort, and memories. It's not just stuff to me. It's my life spread across every room. That's why the idea of letting a stranger in feels so heavy. It's not like a hotel where everything is replaceable. Here, every drawer has something personal in it. Every closet hides a piece of who I am. And when I picture an unknown person walking through it all, sleeping in my bed, opening my fridge, standing in my bathroom brushing their teeth where I brush mine every morning, it makes me tense up. I know people say you should lock your valuables away or get a storage unit if you're worried. But what about the things you can't put away? The floors that creak because you've lived on them, the walls you've painted, the pictures you've hung? What about the sense of privacy that comes from knowing no one else has stood in your living room flipping through your books? You can't pack that up. You can't hide that. I've read stories about hosts coming back and finding their homes trashed. Furniture broken, holes in the walls, food rotting in the kitchen. Some come back to find their TV stolen, their laptops gone, or their bedsheets ruined. Others find smaller things missing, clothes, jewelry, even silverware. The idea of walking back into your own house and realizing something is gone, even something as small as a favorite mug, makes me feel sick. It's not just the loss of the object. It's the proof that someone rummaged through your life. The money sounds good, sure. People say you can cover rent, even make a profit. But at what cost? Letting a stranger in means you're trusting them with everything. You don't know what kind of person they are. You don't know what they'll do when you're not there. Maybe they're fine. Maybe they just sleep, cook, and leave. But what if they don't? What if they throw a party or invite people over or use your place as if it's theirs to ruin? I picture myself coming back from a trip, opening the door, and stepping into a house that doesn't feel like mine anymore. Maybe the smell is different, like smoke or cologne I don't use. Maybe the furniture is moved around, chairs in different spots, the rug crooked, little things just slightly off. Maybe my drawers are left open, shirts unfolded, papers shuffled. Even if nothing is stolen, even if everything is technically still there, that knowledge that someone has touched it all would stay with me. And then there's the bigger fear that everything could be gone, that I come back to an empty space, stripped bare of the things I worked for, things I built a life with. The TV, the couch, the table, my clothes, my tools, my books. I can imagine walking through room after room, seeing nothing but marks on the carpet where the furniture used to sit, screw holes in the walls where shelves used to hang, closet doors hanging open with nothing inside, just emptiness. What makes it worse is knowing how hard it would be to fight for any kind of justice. I've heard too many stories of Airbnb dragging their feet, asking for endless documentation, and then denying claims over technicalities. Even if they did reimburse me, would it really make up for the months of stress, the nights of lying awake wondering who had been in my house, who had handled my things? Money doesn't replace the feeling of safety. The truth is, I know myself well enough to admit that I wouldn't get over it. I'm already paranoid just thinking about it. I double-check the locks at night and make sure my curtains are drawn. If I let strangers live in my house, even once, I don't think I'd ever feel secure again. Every time I walked in the door after that, I'd wonder if something had been moved, if someone had copied my key, if another stranger had seen things that should only be mine to see. I can already feel how it would change the way I look at my home. It wouldn't be mine anymore. It would feel like a rental, a space I share with people I don't know. That invisible line between private and public would be gone, and once it's gone, you can't get it back. To me, that's not worth the risk. Maybe it works for people who don't care much about their things, or who live in places where nothing inside matters enough to worry about. Maybe it's perfect for someone who treats their home like a hotel, who can separate themselves from their belongings. But for me, it's different. My home is where my life happens. It's the one place I should be able to close the door and know I'm safe, that everything inside belongs to me and only me. That's why, no matter how tempting the extra money might be, I'll never do it. I'd rather live with less money in my pocket than live with the constant worry that my private space is no longer private. Because once that line is crossed, once you let a stranger into your home, it's not really your home in the same way again. And to me, that's the scariest part. Not the broken furniture or the missing valuables, but the thought of losing that feeling forever. When I first started thinking about renting my place out on Airbnb, I had this pit in my stomach that never really went away. On the surface, it made sense. I had an apartment that was nicer than what I needed, in a decent neighborhood with good access to public transport. Everyone online was talking about how much money you could make, how easy it was to list your space, and how the company offered protection for hosts. It sounded like free income, like all I had to do was clean, take some photos, and open the door. But every time I thought seriously about doing it, a darker thought would creep in. I kept imagining what it would be like to hand over the keys to someone I had never met. I imagined leaving for a weekend, letting them stay, and then walking back into my own apartment to see it completely changed. I pictured them digging through my drawers, opening my closet, flipping through my personal papers, even just touching the things I use every day. That thought alone made me feel uneasy. The day I finally listed it, I ignored that feeling. I took photos of the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom. I wrote up the description, put down the price, and hit publish. The listing went live, and I waited. The first request came in almost instantly. It was from someone who said they were in town for work. Their profile had a normal picture, a short bio, and no reviews. I sat there staring at it for a long time, my finger hovering over the accept button. Something in me told me not to do it, but I clicked anyway. The night before they arrived, I cleaned everything top to bottom. I hid a few personal things, documents, jewelry, some cash I had in the drawer, but most of my stuff stayed where it was. My clothes were still in the closet, my books still on the shelves, my electronics still out in the living room. I remember setting the remote control neatly on the coffee table and lining the chairs up at the dining table, as if making everything look perfect would somehow protect it. I left the keys in the lockbox and stayed with a friend for the weekend. At first, I tried to relax. I told myself it was just like a hotel, just another guest passing through. But every time I thought about my apartment, I pictured the guest walking through my rooms, opening the fridge, using my bathroom, sleeping in my bed. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had given away something too personal. When the weekend was over and I came back, the first thing I noticed was how different the air felt. My apartment had this smell that wasn't mine, like cheap cologne mixed with takeout food. I walked into the living room, and at first glance, nothing seemed out of place. The couch was still there, the TV still on the stand, the chairs still tucked in. But when I looked closer, I saw things were slightly shifted. The rug was pushed over, one of the chairs was at an odd angle, and a few of my books were out of order. In the bedroom, the bed was made, but not the way I left it. The pillows were stacked differently, the blanket tucked too tightly on one side. My closet door was half open. I looked inside and saw the clothes hanging slightly uneven, as if someone had pushed through them with their hands. My drawers had been opened and not shut all the way. Even though nothing looked obviously missing, the idea that someone had gone through my things made me feel sick. I walked into the bathroom, and that was when the dread really hit. The sink was wet, the counter had drops of water, and the towels I had left folded were unfolded and shoved back sloppily. My toothbrush was missing. It wasn't in the cup by the sink anymore. I opened every drawer, looked under the counter, even checked the trash. It was gone. That one detail, that they had touched something so personal, something I put in my mouth every day, sent a cold wave through me. I went back into the kitchen, and more little details started to stand out. A knife from the block was missing, just one. A glass from the cabinet was gone. The drawer with utensils was shuffled, forks and spoons out of order. The fridge door was slightly sticky, like it had been opened and closed with greasy hands. By the time I finished walking through the apartment, I realized that even though almost everything was technically still there, nothing felt like mine anymore. It felt like a stranger had taken ownership of it for 2 days, and I was just walking into their leftovers. The violation wasn't in what was stolen, it was in what was touched, shifted, or used. That night, lying in the bed that someone else had just slept in, I couldn't relax. I kept thinking about them lying in the same spot, breathing into the pillow, touching the blanket. I kept imagining their hands on the doorknobs, their feet on the floor, their eyes looking at my photos on the shelves. I realized I didn't feel at home in my own place anymore. I thought maybe it would get easier, that the next booking would feel less invasive. But the opposite happened. The next guest stayed longer, and when I came back, I found food wrappers shoved under the couch, stains on the carpet, and my drawers opened again. A shirt was missing from the closet. Just one shirt. That was worse than if they had stolen something expensive, because it proved they were going through my personal belongings. Every new booking added another layer of unease. A mug went missing, then a blanket, then a pair of headphones. Small things, just enough to make me question if I had misplaced them or if they had been taken. But deep down, I knew. Airbnb had all their policies about host protection, but what they couldn't protect me from was the feeling of being exposed. The idea that strangers had unrestricted access to the place I lived, the place I kept everything important, ate, slept, and tried to feel safe. I kept telling myself it was worth it for the money, but each time I walked back into my apartment after a guest, I felt less and less like it belonged to me. One night, after another stay, I came back and realized the spare key I had hidden in the kitchen drawer was gone. That was the moment I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I changed the locks, pulled my listing down, and swore I'd never let strangers into my home again. The money I made wasn't worth the price I paid in peace of mind. I didn't lose thousands in furniture or electronics, but I lost something more important: the sense of safety in my own space. Even now, months later, when I unlock the door and walk inside, I still glance around, half expecting to find things out of place, half expecting to realize someone has been here. That's my worst fear about doing Airbnb. Not that someone will smash windows or haul everything away in a truck, but that slowly, piece by piece, the boundary between my life and theirs disappears. That strangers will walk through the rooms I call home, leave their invisible fingerprints on everything, and take away the one thing I can't replace: the feeling that my home is truly mine. And that fear is what finally made me stop. I'd rather have less money and keep my space private than keep opening my door to strangers and never feel safe again. I used to think hosting on Airbnb was one of the easiest ways to make extra money. We had a nice house in a good neighborhood with plenty of space, and it made sense to rent it out while we went on vacation. Other people were doing it, and the reviews on the platform made it look like a safe, modern way to cover some of our expenses. At first, I had no reason to believe it could go wrong. When we planned our trip, I listed the house. It was a furnished home, fully lived in, with all the little touches that made it feel warm. The living room had the leather couch we saved up for, the dining room table was oak, solid and heavy, and in the bedrooms we had comfortable mattresses, nice lamps, and dressers filled with our things. We didn't hide everything away because we thought guests booked homes to experience them, to feel comfortable, to live like they belonged there for a while. The profile that booked with us looked normal enough. It had a smiling picture, a name that didn't raise any red flags, and even a handful of reviews, which I later realized must have been fake. At the time, I didn't look too deeply. I just accepted the booking, tidied up, left the keys with the lockbox, and felt good knowing the house wouldn't sit empty while we were away. We left for our trip without much worry. During the vacation, I didn't think much about the house. I assumed it was fine. I had this picture in my head of someone using the kitchen, sitting on the couch to watch TV, sleeping in the bed, then leaving and locking the door behind them. I thought, at worst, they might leave a few dirty dishes or forget to take out the trash. When we came back, the second I walked into the house, I knew something was wrong. The air felt empty, wrong in a way I can't explain. It was too bare, too quiet, as if the life had been drained out of the place. At first, I thought maybe I was just noticing the house in a new way after being gone. But then I started looking closer. The TV was gone. The couch was gone. The oak dining table was gone. The lamps were gone. The dressers were gone. I moved from room to room and realized every single thing of value had been taken. Electronics, furniture, jewelry, even small items like kitchen knives and the coffee maker. Clothes had been taken too. It was as if someone had carefully stripped the house down, taking anything that could be carried or sold. I remember standing in the bedroom, staring at the empty space where the dresser used to be. The carpet had indentations from where the weight of the furniture had pressed down for years, and now it was just hollow space. I looked at the wall where the TV had hung, and all that was left were the screw holes. I walked into the closet and saw hangers scattered on the floor, with nothing hanging from them anymore. It wasn't just theft, it was a total violation. The longer I walked through the house, the more it sank in that they had taken their time. This wasn't rushed. They had gone through drawers, cabinets, closets. They picked through everything we owned, and they weren't sloppy. They didn't smash windows, they didn't force anything open. They had the keys, they had access, and they walked out with our lives in boxes. I felt sick. I sat on the floor of the empty living room, staring at the space where our couch used to be, and my hands were shaking. We contacted Airbnb immediately. We sent photos, detailed lists of what was missing, and proof of ownership. The support team gave us polite responses, asked us to upload more documents, told us to wait for their claims team. We waited. Weeks passed, then a month, then two. We got generic replies, promises of escalation, and then silence. The worst part was that life didn't pause for us. We had to keep living in that stripped-down house. Every day was a reminder of what had happened. We had no couch to sit on, no table to eat at, no TV to turn on. We bought a cheap air mattress just to sleep because our bed was gone. Walking into the kitchen meant seeing the empty space where the coffee maker had been, the blank counter where the toaster used to sit. Even something as simple as trying to cook dinner turned into a reminder, because they had taken half the pots and pans. It wasn't just about the money, though the damages added up to tens of thousands of dollars. It was about the feeling that someone had gone through everything we owned, touched it, taken it, decided what was worth keeping. The house didn't feel like our home anymore. It felt invaded, hollow, and unsafe. I started double-checking the locks every night, even though I had replaced them all after it happened. I set up cameras, alarms, and motion detectors. But none of it took away the sense that I had lost control. Someone had walked into my home under the pretense of being a guest, and because I trusted the platform, I had handed them the keys. Airbnb's host guarantee, which they advertised so confidently, turned out to be a maze of paperwork, delays, and excuses. Every time I thought I was making progress, I got another email asking for more documentation or reminding me that they were still reviewing the case. Meanwhile, the bills for replacing our things kept piling up. 2 months later, we were still waiting for a resolution, still trying to get even a fraction of the damages covered. And every day that passed made it clear that the company wasn't on our side. They weren't rushing to help us rebuild what we lost. They weren't concerned about the fact that someone had used a fake profile to wipe out a family's home. Their concern was protecting their system, protecting their brand. I haven't hosted since. I deactivated the listing and promised myself I'd never open my doors like that again. I couldn't imagine letting another stranger into my home, not after what happened. The idea of trusting a profile photo and a few lines of text to decide who gets access to everything I own feels insane now. The scariest part wasn't just the theft. It was how easily it happened, how little resistance there was, how quickly everything was taken away. We had thought of Airbnb as a safe platform, a bridge between hosts and guests, backed by a big company that would step in if anything went wrong. But when it really mattered, we were on our own. Now, when I walk through the house, even though we've slowly replaced some of the furniture, it doesn't feel the same. Every item I see is shadowed by the memory of the one that was stolen. Every corner reminds me of how it looked when it was bare. I don't feel safe here anymore. Not the way I used to. That's what sticks with me the most. Not just the loss of things, not just the money, but the loss of trust in my own space. Once it's gone, you can't get it back. And that's why I'll never host on Airbnb again. I used to host on Airbnb, and when I started, I really thought it was going to be a simple way to make some extra money. I had a nice place, a luxury one-bedroom in a major city, the kind of apartment that costs around $2,000 a month. The building itself was clean, modern, with a doorman in the lobby and tight security. The kind of place where you feel like nothing could go wrong, because everything looks so controlled and professional. I thought being a host would be straightforward. Take photos of the apartment, put it up on the site, meet a few guests, and collect a side income. It started off pretty smooth, at least in the very beginning. My first couple of guests were fine, nothing worth remembering. They came, stayed a few nights, left the place clean enough, and left me decent reviews. I felt like I had figured out a good rhythm. Then one day I got a request that seemed a little different. The guest said he actually worked for Airbnb as an executive. He messaged me saying he was familiar with the building, that his brother lived there, and that he'd be in and out with no problem. I figured that was actually a good sign. If someone who worked for the company trusted my place enough to stay there, then maybe I was doing things right. When he arrived, though, everything started to feel off. I got a message from him almost right away saying the location was too noisy. That struck me as odd, because yes, it was a busy part of the city, but that's something you could figure out before booking just by looking at the map. He also said the bed wasn't comfortable, which I knew wasn't true because I had replaced it not long before with a mid-range mattress that plenty of guests had already said was fine. The more he messaged me, the more I started to get this uneasy feeling in my stomach, like no matter what I did, he wasn't going to be satisfied. Within a day or two, he said he wanted to end his stay early. I didn't want a problem, so I agreed, sticking to the cancellation terms I had written in my listing. I thought that would be the end of it. He'd leave, I'd clean up, and I'd move on to the next guest. But then he disputed the charges and somehow got a refund, which I later learned meant I was basically left with nothing from the booking. On top of that, he left me a review that wasn't terrible but wasn't good either. It was just enough, under 5 stars, to cost me something I had been working toward: superhost status. For hosts, that badge meant higher visibility, more bookings, more trust from guests. Losing it stung, and it made me realize how fragile the whole system was. That experience alone should have been enough of a red flag to make me stop, but I told myself it was a one-time issue. I cleaned the apartment, relisted it, and figured the next guest would be better. A couple of months later, I accepted a booking from a group who said they were in town for a conference. They didn't raise any red flags in their messages. They sounded professional and their profile looked fine. I didn't expect anything unusual, but when they arrived, things took a different turn. I didn't know it at the time, but they had no intention of treating my place with any kind of respect. They threw a party, not just a small gathering, but a full-on party in my one-bedroom apartment. When I came in after they left, I felt like I was walking into a nightmare. There were stains all over the carpet, holes in the walls, and trash everywhere. The bathroom was disgusting. The toilet looked like it hadn't just been used carelessly. It looked like it had been abused, left as a deliberate mess. The apartment didn't smell like my apartment anymore. It smelled like stale alcohol, sweat, and something sour that lingered no matter how long I left the windows open. The damage wasn't just cosmetic either. The carpet was ruined. Some of the walls had actual holes that would require patching, and I could tell right away it would cost thousands of dollars to put the place back to how it had been before. The worst part was, I had another guest arriving the next day. Panic set in as soon as I realized that. I contacted Airbnb right away, told them everything, sent them photos, and tried to explain how bad it was. I expected them to tell me to cancel the next booking and focus on repairs, but instead their main concern was whether I could get the apartment cleaned and ready for the incoming guest. They said not to worry, that all I had to do was submit photos and proof, and they'd make sure I got reimbursed for the damage. So I scrambled. I hired cleaners, spent hours moving things around, tried covering up the worst parts of the carpet with rugs, and patched what I could myself just to make it look acceptable. Somehow, I pulled it together enough for the next guest to stay without complaint. When the dust settled, I went back to Airbnb with my claim. I had all the photos, all the documentation, everything they asked for. That's when they told me something that made my stomach drop. Because I had already hosted another guest after the damage, I was no longer eligible to file a claim. Their explanation was that by accepting someone else, I had essentially confirmed the apartment was fine. Couldn't believe it. I had done exactly what they encouraged me to do. Keep the booking, clean up, move forward, and now they were using that against me. I fought it for a while, sent emails, argued back and forth, but the system was completely against me. Eventually, I realized there was nothing else I could do. The money was gone, the damages were mine to pay, and I was just another host who got chewed up by the platform. The only thing I thought I could do at that point was leave the guests a negative review, warn other hosts so they wouldn't go through the same thing. I wrote it out clearly, detailed what they had done, and hit submit. It made me feel like at least I was doing something, even if Airbnb wouldn't back me up. But a few months later, I got a notification that my review had been removed. Airbnb had decided it didn't meet their guidelines. Just like that, the only thing I had left, the truth, my warning, was gone. That was the moment I realized the entire system wasn't built for hosts like me. It was built for the guests, the people spending money, and we were just expendable. It didn't matter if my apartment was trashed, if I lost thousands of dollars, or if I spent hours cleaning up messes that weren't mine. In the end, Airbnb only cared about keeping the bookings going. I stopped hosting after that. I couldn't bring myself to open my door to strangers anymore. Every time I thought about it, all I could picture was walking back into my apartment to see it destroyed, or fighting through endless emails trying to get justice that would never come. I had started hosting because I thought it would be easy income, but what I ended up with was stress, debt, and this constant, lingering fear that my home wasn't really mine as long as it was listed online. Now, when I think back to it, what scares me the most isn't just the damage or the money. It's how powerless I felt in my own space. I had let people I didn't know into my home, trusted a company to protect me, and in the end, I was completely alone when things went wrong. I had no control over what strangers did once they were inside, and no control over how the platform chose to handle it afterward. That's what made me quit. Not the stains, not the holes, not the lost money, but the realization that I had given away control of my own home to people who didn't care about me at all. And that feeling, once it gets into you, doesn't go away. Even now, years later, I still double-check the locks at night and feel a strange unease when I hear noises in the hallway outside my door. Hosting on Airbnb didn't just cost me money. It took away my sense of safety in the place I live.